Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to share and subscribe the channel. It was quiet in the Daxari skyport, the kind of silence that felt as though it had weight. No ships were moving, no calls over the comms, just the low hum of energy fields flickering like invisible curtains across the hangar. Commander Zale stood on the observation deck, staring out at the black stretch of space. His forehead narrowed, his skin was pale blue under the cold lighting. "Is it true?" asked Aral, his junior, stepping beside him. She was younger still in training, but the fear in her voice wasn't from inexperience. It was something deeper. Ancient Zale didn't look at her right away. He kept watching the stars as if expecting something to crawl out from them. "They decoded it," he finally said. "The signal was real and it's human." Aral's breath caught in her throat, but humans went extinct 40,000 years ago, before the second galactic age. "That can't be." Zale turned to her. "Now, we always thought that. Now we're not so sure. It had come 3 cycles ago, an anomaly first detected on the edge of the abandoned Virex cluster, a dead sector radio-silent for thousands of years. But something had stirred, a pulse so old yet so precise it couldn't be natural. The Interstellar Alliance sent their best linguists, historians, and xenotech engineers to analyze it. It was a message long, emotional, and terrifying. Aral was one of the few who'd been allowed to hear the raw transmission. The voice on the recording was human, unmistakably so, male, tired, frantic. "This is Earth. This is our last cry. If you hear this, don't come looking for us." It spoke of a war not with aliens, not with AI, but with something far worse. Themselves, a species turned inward, torn apart by an obsession with power, control, and immortality. They had reached the stars, touched other worlds, and then set fire to everything they found. Colonies devoured each other. Science was twisted into weapons that didn't just destroy planets. They erased them from memory. And now only one remained, a man whose name was never given, his location scrambled, but his words haunted. "We deserved extinction, but I couldn't let the silence be the only thing that followed. So I left this message, not for forgiveness, not for pity, but as a warning." Zale felt it deep in his bones. Even though his kind had never met a human in their history, that voice had weight, something raw, primal, that connected every species capable of feeling regret. "You think they're really gone?" Aral asked quietly. Zale didn't answer immediately. He tapped a console and pulled up the star map. The message had bounced between hundreds of dead satellites, old human tech that still blinked in the void, as if waiting for this moment. Someone or something had made sure that message stayed alive for 40,000 years. "I think," he said finally, "some echoes are too loud to fade." Aral leaned closer to the screen. One sector lit up red, not a distress signal, but something older, a beacon. Zale frowned. "That wasn't there yesterday. It's transmitting the same frequency." Aral whispered, "Exactly the same as the message." Zale stared at it. The coordinates matched the edge of the old human expanse, a part of the galaxy everyone avoided, superstitions, mostly ships that vanished, strange time loops, ghost signals. "I want a crew ready in 6 hours, Zale said, turning sharply. "We're going there." Aral blinked, "But I need to know if this is really just a message or if something's still out there." As she ran off, Zale stared out again into the dark. He remembered the last words of the recording, burned into his memory. "We burned our heaven into ash, don't make the same mistake. But what if? What if something human had survived? What if the stars weren't just haunted by their message? What if they were haunted by something far worse, something waiting?" The journey to the edge of the human expanse was uneasy from the start. Zale's ship, the Veil Strider, glided through dark sectors where even light seemed hesitant to pass. Space here wasn't just empty, it felt watchful. They were 5 days into hyperslip travel, and already the crew was restless. Systems flickered without cause, dreams turned violent, even the air felt off. Aral sat in her bunk, staring at the same blinking line of coordinates that had brought them here. It hadn't stopped transmitting since they left Daxari space, a same, repeating signal like a heartbeat in the dark. Her translator had deciphered more of the original message, and with each new word, she felt the cold fingers of unease trace her spine. "We tried to control death, and death fought back." Zale hadn't slept properly since launch. He stood on the bridge most nights, eyes red, running simulations, trying to map the region ahead. But most of the data was corrupted. Black holes that weren't supposed to be there, debris fields that didn't match any known ship designs, and signals buried so deep they almost sounded like whispers. They reached the beacon on the 6th day. It floated alone near a broken moon. The moon itself looked shattered from within, like something had exploded at its core and burst outwards. The beacon was ancient, rusted, but still functional, human tech, unmistakably so, and yet something about it felt wrong. "This thing shouldn't be broadcasting after 40,000 years, said Tevin, the ship's tech lead. "It's running on a loop, but there's no visible power source, it's just active." Aral moved closer, scanning its structure. "It's been upgraded," she murmured. That made everyone pause. Zale stared at the screen, lips tightening. Then someone or something has been here, maybe still is. They launched a probe to examine the beacon. As soon as it latched onto the device, the signal changed. The crew watched in silence as the old voice returned, not just a warning this time, but something new. "Congratulations, traveler, you've proven curiosity still exists. But now you must choose, knowledge or survival. What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Tevin muttered before anyone could respond. The lights dimmed, a low thrum rolled through the ship like a growl from the deep. Screens blinked out, gravity flickered. "Am I?" Aral gasped, grabbing the console. "No," Zale said, his voice hollow. "It's not technological, it's psychic." The voice returned, but not over the comms. It was inside them now, in their heads. "You can't comprehend what we became, but you will feel it." Aral fell to her knees, clutching her temples as images flashed behind her eyes. Cities falling upward into the sky. People twisted into light, screaming stars, and something massive, wrapped in wires and bone, watching from behind a shattered veil. "Commander," she shouted, but Zale wasn't moving. He stood frozen, eyes wide, caught in something she couldn't see. With a desperate jolt, she activated a manual override on the comms and cut power to the probe. Instantly, the beacon went silent, the psychic pressure vanished. The crew gasped one by one as the darkness inside their heads receded. Zale blinked, staggered, then caught himself on the console. "What the hell was that?" he rasped. Aral was pale, her voice trembling. "That wasn't a message, it was a trap." Silence followed. The crew exchanged looks, some terrified, some angry, most just shaken. Ziel turned back to the view screen. The beacon was still there, dead and quiet again, floating above the broken moon. But something had changed. The ship's scanners were now picking up structures on the dark side of the moon, massive and buried deep within the rock, long dormant and waking up. "You still want to go down there?" Teen asked, barely keeping the fear from his voice. Ziel didn't hesitate. "We're already here, and whatever that was, it's just the beginning." The crew looked toward the moon. They had come chasing a message. Now the stars were whispering something else. They're not extinct. The shuttle descended toward the fractured moon in tense silence. Everyone on board was quiet, too quiet. Even the usual chatter of instruments seemed subdued, like the ship itself was holding its breath. Outside the small viewports, jagged spires of rock jutted from the surface like broken teeth. The terrain looked unnatural, like it had been sculpted by something that hated symmetry or sanity. Aral sat strapped in beside Zale, eyes scanning the data feeds on her wrist pad. "We're approaching the signal's origin point. There's a structure buried half a click below the surface. The materials are unknown, not metal, not organic, something else." Zale gave a small nod. "Keep recording everything. This moon might be the key to understanding what the humans became." They touched down in a crater filled with glassy, obsidian-like dust that shimmered under their boots. The structure's entrance was exactly where the scans predicted, half submerged under rock and pulsing with faint red light like a heartbeat beneath the ground. Tevin examined it closely. "There's no lock, no control panel, but it reacts to us like it's reading our biosigns." The moment Zale stepped forward, the wall dissolved into smoke and opened a narrow corridor before them. Aral stared in disbelief. "It's keyed to humanoids." Inside the corridor, walls were lined with something that looked like bone but moved like muscle. Pulses of light ran along veins in the walls, guiding them forward. Every step echoed too loudly, even though the air was thick and damp, like breathing inside a lung. Then came the voices. Not loud, not spoken, just whispers in the back of their minds, too faint to understand but strong enough to feel regret, pain, shame. They moved deeper, and soon the hallway opened into a massive chamber that looked like the inside of a cathedral. Twisting spires hanging like chandeliers made of preserved memories, flickering images floating in glass orbs, human cities, children playing, lovers embracing, and then fire, explosions, screams. Zale stepped forward and touched one of the orbs. It lit up and the voice returned. "Memory fragment 314, the fall of Europa colony." Suddenly the chamber shifted. The crew was no longer standing in a room, they were inside the memory. The sky above them was deep red, buildings melted as swarms of nanites devoured the colony. People ran, some already breaking apart mid-sprint as their bodies crumbled into gray dust. A child screamed for her mother, who disintegrated before their eyes. Zale reached out, but his hand passed through her. It's a projection, no, a recording, but real, too real. Then came a figure. It stood taller than a normal human, cloaked in black and silver, no face, just a void. It moved through the chaos untouched, leaving trails of silence behind it. Everyone who had passed simply stopped existing. What is that? Errol asked, her voice shaking. The recording paused. The voice returned. Designation Echo Sovereign, Phase 3 Human Evolution, Result Catastrophic Failure. The scene dissolved. They were back in the chamber, gasping for air. Errol dropped to her knees. They didn't go extinct. They evolved into something wrong. Tevin looked like he was going to be sick. They killed their own kind with a thought. That's not evolution, that's damnation. Zale stood still, processing. They reached the pinnacle of control, no war, no hunger, no dissent, but they lost what made them human. They didn't die out, they chose to change. Suddenly the room dimmed. Another voice echoed, deeper, older. You shouldn't have come. Lights flared in the walls, and a figure materialized before them, floating above the ground, featureless, wrapped in metal strands that pulsed like nerves. It wasn't a hologram, it was real, and it was watching them. I am Remnant One, the last witness, the last warden. Zale stepped forward, tense. You're human. I was once, before we consumed ourselves and called it progress. Errol tried to speak, but the figure raised a hand and her voice died in her throat. You opened the memory, you heard the message. Now you must see the truth. The chamber began to shift again, walls folding inward, forming a new corridor, one leading even deeper beneath the surface. The last words of Remnant One echoed through them, not just in sound but in thought. If you turn back now, you might live, but if you go forward, you'll never be the same again. They stepped forward, not because they were brave, but because they couldn't turn back, not after what they'd seen, not after what they felt. The corridor leading deeper into the moon wasn't made of walls anymore. It was memory, living memory. The floor shimmered with moving images, flickers of Earth's past, sometimes beautiful, sometimes horrific. Errol walked carefully, each step sending ripples through the floor as if it were liquid. In one moment, she saw a newborn in a sterile lab held by gloved hands. The next, a city crumbling under a storm of black ash. Everything they'd been told about human extinction was unraveling. The truth wasn't death, it was transformation, and it was terrifying. Remnant One hovered beside them, silent, guiding them with no words. Zale watched it closely. It moved with purpose, but not like a machine. There was grief in its motions, slow and deliberate, as if it hated every step it took. Why are you still here? Zale finally asked. Remnant One didn't look at him. To remember, to warn, to ensure no one else follows our path. Tevin shook his head. You had the whole galaxy, you had immortality. What went so wrong? They entered a new chamber, a vast circular space lit by a cold red glow. In the center stood a throne, or what used to be one. It was shattered, and around it were skeletons, thousands of them fused into the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. They weren't just dead. They were preserved in a state of eternal agony, mouths open, mid-scream, eyes wide with terror. Remnant One turned to face them, its voice low. We made gods of ourselves, and then we needed worshippers. When none were left, we devoured each other. Those who resisted the final phase became this. Errol backed away from the walls, sick to her stomach. You murdered your own people for evolution, for order. The figure said simply, for control. Emotion was inefficient, free will was chaotic. We rewrote ourselves and lost everything. Zale clenched his fists. Then why warn us? Why leave the message? Remnant One's form flickered, almost as if it were struggling to stay whole. Because even in our fall, something remained, a flicker of shame, of humanity. It gestured toward the broken throne. From beneath it, a platform rose slowly, carrying a sealed stasis pod. It was old, older than anything in the chamber. Frost clung to the glass, and inside, curled in a fetal position, was a human, an unchanged one. Errol stepped closer. This isn't possible. One of the last Remnant Ones said, spared from the final purge, kept alive in case we forgot who we were. I've kept him hidden for 40,000 years. Tevin stared pale. Why? Remnant One turned to Zale. Because he is the final message. The pod began to hum, lights flickered on, systems rebooting after untold millennia. The human inside stirred. Zale stepped forward, his voice low. And what happens when he wakes up? Remnant One's form glitched again, its tone changing, grimmer than before. Then the universe learns what humans really are, not gods, not monsters, just fragile creatures with the power to destroy everything. Alarms blared suddenly through the chamber. Tevin spun. What's happening? Remnant One raised its head. Someone else received the signal, another species. They are coming, and they will not listen like you did. Zale looked down at the stirring human, then back at the walls filled with the remains of a lost civilization. The galaxy wasn't ready for this, and Earth's nightmare wasn't over. It was only just beginning. A tremor rolled through the chamber like thunder trapped in stone. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Lights embedded in the alien architecture flickered erratically, casting the room in a strobe of red and shadow. The ancient stasis pod in the center vibrated softly, the human inside stirring under the glow of flickering lights. Errol moved protectively between the pod and the door, weapon drawn. Tavin checked his scanner. It's shorting out from electromagnetic interference. Whatever is coming isn't subtle. Zale turned sharply toward Remnant One. Who's coming? The entity's voice remained eerily calm. A salvage fleet from the Varn Dominion, 10 ships, non-diplomatic class drawn by the signal. They have no context. They believe they've found a derelict human stronghold. Tevin swore under his breath. Varn don't ask questions, they just take. Zale clenched his jaw. Can we seal this chamber? No, Remnant One replied. You open the path, they will follow it. The pod let out a soft hiss, mist curling around the edges as systems completed the revival protocol. A low-pitched tone thumped through the floor. The human inside moved again, more definitively this time. A twitch of the hand, a shift in the chest, then a sudden breath that rattled like old leaves. Errol's eyes widened. He's waking up. Zale felt the weight of it hit him all at once. They were standing beside a piece of Earth's purest past, untouched by the madness of what came after, a survivor not just of time, but of extinction by design, a man pulled from death itself to witness the end of history. And now they had uninvited guests on the way. The walls rippled. A display formed midair, a view from orbit, 10 Varn ships breaking from hyperslip, engines burning like blue comets, descending fast, heavily armed, heavily shielded. We have minutes, Errol said, scanning the chamber. Remnant One hovered beside the pod. He cannot be moved yet. His reawakening is delicate. If interrupted, he will die, and with him the truth. Zale faced the entrance. Then we'll hold them off. Tevin let out a nervous laugh. Us against a Varn strike team. Zale's eyes were still fixed. Because if they find him, they'll turn him into a weapon. They won't care who he is. They'll twist Earth's last survivor into their next warhead. Silence, then RL stepped beside him. All right, let's make sure they never get the chance. Tevin cursed again, then loaded his plasma repeater. This is the worst damn first contact mission I've ever been on. The walls around them shifted again, forming barricades and corridors. The structure was responding to the threat, protecting the pod. It recognized the danger. Remnant One floated toward a control node and placed its hand against it. I will delay them. I cannot stop them. Zale nodded. Buy us 10 minutes, that's all we need. Moments later, the first shock wave hit. The outer chamber exploded in a flash of heat and shrapnel. Varn breachers swarmed through, all jagged armor and glowing eyes. They moved with terrifying precision, weapons ready, minds empty of fear. Errol opened fire, contact. The fight erupted like lightning. Tevin covered the left flank, spraying suppressive fire into the corridor as the Varn advanced. Errol moved with brutal grace, taking down 2 with pinpoint shots before diving behind a pillar. Zale surged forward, rifle blazing, fury in every pull of the trigger. Behind them, the pod glowed brighter. The man inside opened his eyes, just 2 pinpricks of blue light. He didn't speak, didn't panic, he just watched. And as the Varn closed in, something ancient flickered behind his stare, not confusion, not fear, but recognition. The ship shook again, another blast, this one closer. Remnant One turned sharply. They've reached the inner sanctum. They will breach in 60 seconds, Zale shouted over the chaos. What happens when he fully wakes up? Remnant One's voice grew solemn. He remembered a pause, everything. Errol's face turned blood-tinged, her voice trembling, and what if remembering breaks him? Remnant One didn't answer, because it didn't have to. They all felt the energy shift in the chamber, as if something older than memory had stirred, stretched its limbs, and was rising again. Earth's last sun had returned, and the stars would never be the same. The world changed the moment he stood, not slowly, not gently, but like reality noticed him again. The air thickened. The hum of ancient machines in the walls shifted into a low, resonating tone that matched his pulse. The light dimmed around him, but his skin glowed faintly blue, like bioluminescence clinging to a body that shouldn't have been alive. He stepped out of the stasis pod without hesitation, no stumble, no confusion, just quiet purpose. Zale took a cautious step forward, weapon lowered. "Do you know who you are?" The man turned to him, his voice calm, steady, unnaturally clear. "I am Isaac, a name that didn't echo through history, not in the archives, not in the human legacy. Just Isaac." Errol flinched as another explosion shook the structure. The Varn were closing in again, pushing through Remnant One's final defense protocols. The alien corridors were folding, collapsing, trying to trap the invaders, but it wasn't enough. They were coming, dozens of them, maybe more. Remnant One hovered beside Isaac, its flickering form slightly more stable now. "You are awake too soon, Isaac." Isaac looked at the destruction around him, eyes absorbing everything, the weapons, the architecture, the digital echoes of extinction. His voice was cold. "Then I was right to stay asleep." Zale stepped closer, uncertain. "Do you remember what happened to Earth?" Isaac looked up, eyes distant, filled with something bottomless. "I remember fire, silence, the sky breaking. I remember the last message we sent to the stars, not a cry for help, a warning." Errol asked softly, "What were you warning us about?" He turned to her, and for a brief second she felt as if she were staring into a void that remembered God's dying. "Us," he said simply. A silence heavier than any noise followed. Tevin leaned against the support beam, wounded but still clutching his rifle. "So what now? You go back into your little box, and we keep pretending Earth was a sad story with a quiet end." Isaac walked forward toward the breach, where the Varn were now visible, shadows behind distorted energy fields, preparing to storm the final chamber. "No," he said. "I will show them what we became." Zale reached out. "Isaac, wait. If you do what I think you're about to do, you came here to find the truth." Isaac cut him off. "You came for the last piece. I am that piece." He raised his hand. The lights bent around his fingers, the walls breathed in response, and then he touched the floor. Instantly, the entire moon shuddered, not just the chamber, the whole celestial body. A vast network of dormant systems.